Hamas wants the war to end indefinitely and permanently. And what we've seen since the ceasefire went into effect is that they still have a pretty strong hold on Gaza's civil services. Since the war came to a pause, we've seen hundreds of Hamas fighters come up from underground, from the tunnels, and they have started to re-exert some control over the Strip, which, as we know, was a big part and was literally one of Israel's primary war efforts, was to ensure the removal of Hamas from power.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, President Trump made a lot of headlines this week in his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He had something to say about Gaza that I think took a lot of people by surprise. What did he say?
President Trump announced his plan for the U.S. to take over Gaza and rebuild it. And in this plan that he laid out, all roughly 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza would be evacuated to other Arab nations nearby, and then the U.S. would facilitate the reconstruction of Gaza. The plan was send shockwaves all over the globe. Arab nations, even though his comments occurred in the middle of the night local time, almost immediately denounced it. And a lot of what they were saying is that this has the feel, or looks like it could be considered ethnic cleansing, the forced removal of Palestinians out of Gaza. And so, in particular, Jordan and Egypt, which have not wanted to take Palestinian refugees throughout the war, said they didn't want to be complicit in what they viewed would be ethnic cleansing. And so there's also a number of questions as to whether or not this was more of a negotiating tactic than a final plan.
Right.
And so President Trump had floated this idea of Egypt and Jordan taking refugees in, and both of them were pretty strongly against the idea. And so there are people who believe that President Trump's statements this week were more of a negotiating tactic to get Jordan and Egypt open to the idea of resettlement of some Palestinian refugees. The other thing that was pretty stark in the president's announcement and the White House press briefings this week since then is that they view Gaza as inhabitable. And so they really believe that it would actually be, and this is what the White House said, it would be cruel to keep the Palestinians in Gaza given the level of destruction that occurred throughout the 15-month war. And so there are a number of questions about this plan, if it's actually a plan as opposed to a negotiating tactic, like would it require U.S. troops on the ground? We heard both from the White House and from the Pentagon that the president hasn't said one way or the other whether or not U.S. troops would be involved. But we saw a lot of Republicans this time last year express concern when the previous administration wanted to build a pier off of Gaza's coast.
Right.
And so when that happened, the war was still ongoing, but troops were not on the ground. They were in the Mediterranean. And in this case, while the war will have ended, Hamas is still in Gaza right now.
So you mentioned the question about troops on the ground in Gaza, U.S. troops. And so there was significant domestic political backlash, U.S. political backlash, including from some Republicans who felt that a plan along these lines is a violation of the type of foreign policy that Trump ran on last year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We saw a lot of people that said that this sort of feels like they would be getting tied down into another forever war or nation-state building. And a big reason they felt that way is because, according to the administration's own admission, Gaza will take probably 10 to 15 years to rebuild. So this is not or would not be a quick deployment. This is something that would take significant years. It would take a significant amount of money, and it's unclear who would fund it and who would be involved in it.
What is the current status of the war in Gaza?
Right now, we have made it through about a third of the 6-week ceasefire pause. And at this point, we're at the time where the mediators are getting ready to start reconvening as to how to move to phase 2. In the second phase of the deal, we'll see, as it was laid out by the previous administration, Israel would remove all of its forces from Gaza, and in exchange, Hamas would release all of the remaining living hostages. And so at this point, it's unclear exactly if phase 2 will happen, simply because a major aspect of the disagreements as to why this deal hasn't come to fruition previously is because Hamas wants the war to end indefinitely and permanently. And what we've seen since the ceasefire went into effect is that they still have a pretty strong hold on Gaza's civil services. Since the war came to a pause, we've seen hundreds of Hamas fighters come up from underground, from the tunnels, and they have started to re-exert some control over the Strip, which, as we know, was a big part and was literally one of Israel's primary war efforts, was to ensure the removal of Hamas from power. And so at this point, it doesn't look like they've accomplished that. And Israeli officials have said they want to leave open the possibility to go back in to achieve that very goal.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.